My name is Anjali. For years I told myself that silence was safer than truth, that keeping my head down in my mother-in-law's house would protect my children. But I was wrong. The night that changed everything was supposed to be a celebration, a grand family party with laughter, food, and photographs to last a lifetime. But instead, I found my daughter standing in the middle of the hall, her head completely shaved. Everyone was laughing. My sister, the one I trusted, clapped her hands and said, "It's just a joke." My mother-in-law smirked from the corner, her eyes burning with satisfaction. My daughter's face crumbled in shame, tears streaming down her cheeks, while the cameras kept flashing. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. What they didn't know was that I carried a secret, one I had buried for years. And that night, I decided I would use it. This is not just a story about betrayal. This is about the day I turned their cruelty into my revenge. When I first stepped into my husband's family home, I told myself it was just a house, but very soon, it began to feel like a cage. The walls were tall, the furniture polished, the carpets spotless, yet I never felt welcome. Every corner smelled of someone else's ownership. Every hallway echoed with footsteps that reminded me, "This is not your place." My mother-in-law watched me like a hawk. The first morning when I made tea, she sipped it slowly, then spat it out in the sink. "Too weak. My son doesn't like this." Her words cut deeper than her tone. My husband stayed silent, eyes fixed on his phone. That silence was the first betrayal I never forgot. From then on, every small thing became a reason to belittle me. If the rice was too soft, if the laundry wasn't folded her way, if I laughed a little too loudly on the phone with my mother, she had a remark ready. And yet she treated my sister like a daughter. Every week she would invite her over, praising her cooking, complimenting her clothes, sliding jewelry into her hands as though I didn't exist. I learned to eat in silence, to swallow my pride with every meal. I'd sit at the long dining table, plates clinking, everyone laughing, while I forced a smile that hurt my face. Inside, I was screaming. At night, when the house was finally quiet, I would write. I kept a small diary hidden under my pillow, scribbling my pain into words no one else could see. It was the only place where I could admit the truth. I was invisible in my own home, but invisibility doesn't last forever. It was during one of those nights, pen shaking in my hand, tears dripping onto the paper, that I realized something. The ones who made me feel small, the ones who smiled while cutting my heart, they had secrets too, and one day I promised myself I would use them. They say cruelty begins in whispers, but in my house it grew louder every day. At first it was little things. My clothes would disappear from the laundry basket, only to reappear days later with bleach stains. My favorite blue sari, the one my mother gave me on my wedding day, came back with a tear across the hem, as though someone had dragged scissors through it. When I confronted my mother-in-law, she raised her eyebrows and said, "Maybe you don't take care of your things." My husband nodded in agreement, as if her word was gospel. But the real betrayals came from someone I never expected, my own sister. She had become my mother-in-law's shadow. They sat together on the sofa, whispering, laughing, exchanging glances whenever I walked in. Sometimes I would catch my sister texting under the table, the screen lighting up with messages she quickly hid. I later realized she wasn't just gossiping with my mother-in-law, she was reporting me, telling her everything about my life, my mistakes, even my secrets. Meals became unbearable. I'd serve food, and before I could even sit down, my mother-in-law would announce, "Your sister told me you were complaining about the work in this house. Is that true?" Everyone would stare. My face burned as if the walls themselves were mocking me. At night, I cried into my pillow. muffling my sobs so my children wouldn't hear. But anger was growing inside me, thick and heavy like smoke filling a locked room. I started to write everything down, dates, times, words spoken, every cruel glance. My diary was no longer just a place for my pain. It was becoming my evidence, and yet I still tried to pretend. To laugh at family gatherings, to smile in photographs, to play the dutiful wife. But behind the polished smiles, cracks were forming. My sister's laughter, my mother-in-law's smirk, my husband's silence, they all blended into one truth. They thought I was powerless, they thought I was blind, but I was watching. And soon they would give me the reason I needed to strike back. The night of the family party still burns in my memory like a wound that refuses to heal. The house was glowing, every chandelier polished until it sparkled like gold. Tables lined with food, trays of sweets, glasses clinking, laughter filling the air. My mother-in-law had insisted that my sister help with the preparations. I knew what that meant. Another evening where I would be reduced to nothing more than a servant in my own home. I wore a simple red saree, nothing too bright. I didn't want to give them another reason to mock me. My daughter clung to my hand as we walked into the hall. She was so excited, her little dress twirling as she ran ahead. For a moment I allowed myself to smile, but that smile was shattered, because when I turned, I saw her standing in the middle of the room. Her beautiful thick hair gone, shaved completely. Guests gasped, some laughed nervously, and then the sound that ripped my heart open, my sister's laughter. Loud, careless, cruel. "It's just a joke," she said, clapping her hands as though she had staged a comedy. My mother-in-law smirked from the corner, sipping her drink like a queen who had won another battle. My daughter's tiny hands trembled as she touched her bare head. Her face crumpled, tears spilling faster than I could wipe them away. She looked at me with eyes that asked a question I could never answer. "Why did you let this happen to me, Mamma?" And in that moment I felt something inside me break and something else ignite. The shame, the laughter, the flashing cameras that caught my daughter's humiliation, they carved a fire into my soul. I didn't scream, I didn't fight. I stood there, silent, while the party roared with laughter around me. But inside I made a vow. This was the last time they would ever laugh at my pain, the last time they would make my child a victim. That night, as my daughter cried herself to sleep in my arms, I whispered to her, "It's over now, my love. They don't know it yet, but this is the beginning of their end." After the party, something in me died, but something else was born. I no longer cried at night. Instead, I listened. I watched, I waited. Every word, every look, every careless mistake my mother-in-law made, I collected them like weapons. And then, one evening, I found the first crack in her perfect mask. I was cleaning the study when I stumbled upon a locked drawer in her desk. She had always forbidden me from touching her things, but that night curiosity burned through my fear. I searched until I found the key hidden inside a hollow, doubt book. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were papers, bank statements, letters, documents in her name. My eyes widened as I pieced it together. She was siphoning money from my father-in-law's accounts, funneling it into secret investments. If the family ever found out, her reputation would shatter. The so-called pillar of respect in our community was nothing but a thief in disguise. And then I found something worse, an old letter, yellowed with time. It wasn't addressed to my father-in-law. It was from another man. The words were desperate, filled with passion, signed with initials I didn't recognize. My chest tightened. She had hidden an affair all these years while lecturing me about honor, loyalty, and respect. I pressed the papers against my chest, my breath coming in sharp bursts. I knew this was dangerous. If she discovered I had seen them, she would destroy me, but for the first time in years I felt power curl in my hands. I went back to my room, locked the door, and opened my diary. On each page I began to copy the details, dates, account numbers, even phrases from the letters. My diary was no longer a graveyard for my tears. It had become a weapon. That night I stood at the window, staring at the moon, whispering to myself, "She thinks she holds me by the throat. She has no idea her own secrets are the rope I'll use to hang her." But revenge is not rushed. It is cooked slowly until the taste of it burns in their mouths, and soon I would set the table. I learned that people reveal themselves when they think they're winning. So I gave them victories, small, poisonous ones that only made them bolder. I smiled when they expected me to crumble. I answered their jibes with quiet politeness while I rewired everything that kept us small. My savings, my friends, the truth tucked into my diary. First I baited my sister. I started leaving little traces, a stray note with a name, a half-told story into which she could insert her gossip. She took it like a dog takes a bone, running straight to my mother-in-law with eyes sparkling. The two of them preened, certain they had me figured out. Next, I seeded doubt in my husband's head. I didn't shout accusations. I planted questions. A casual mention here, a misplaced receipt there, a conversation about finances that stopped just short of a confession. He had always trusted his mother's version of everything. Now he began to notice inconsistencies. Nights she said she was at prayers, but the car keys were missing, bills that didn't add up. His silence shifted into suspicion. Suspicion crept toward him like a slow, cold hand. Then I set the stage publicly. I invited a few relatives for tea, people who liked to gossip but had no love for a scandal. I made sure they were the kind who cherished reputation above kinship. I wore my plain sari and served biscuits with a trembling calm. My mother-in-law arrived radiant and imperious, certain the room would bow. She laughed and told the same stories she always did about duty and honor. While her hands brushed against the envelope I had slipped into the drawer earlier that week, the same drawer she used. The one I had accidentally left ajar. When the right moment came, I let curiosity do the rest. A cousin noticed the envelope. He opened it, thinking it a stray invitation. Inside were photocopies of bank statements, highlighted transfers, and a folded letter with the other man's initials. The room froze. Eyes shifted. My mother-in-law's face did something I had never seen. The mask faltered. She tried to command the story, to laugh it off, to claim confusion, but people hear different things once their ears are tuned. Whispers spread like spilled ink. My sister's smile faltered and then snapped, her hands going cold. My husband's jaw tightened. The silence that used to protect him now felt like accusation. They looked at me, not with scorn now, but with a question I had given them. I sat very still, letting the moment lengthen, letting them wrap themselves in their own embarrassments. I watched the empire they had built begin to crack, and as my mother-in-law opened her mouth to deny everything, a phone buzzed on the table, a message I had sent to the local community group, attaching copies of the documents with names and dates. The room erupted. I felt nothing and everything at once. They had finally seen me, but seeing is not the same as believing. And belief can be dangerous. The silence that followed my mother-in-law's unmasking was unlike any silence I'd known before. It wasn't the silence of being ignored, or belittled, or erased. It was heavier, like the quiet after an explosion, when dust hangs in the air and people stare at the wreckage, too stunned to breathe. Relatives shifted uncomfortably, some refusing to meet her eyes, others whispering in corners. My husband sat frozen, the photocopies trembling in his hands. My sister, once so smug, so eager to be the echo of my humiliation, now shrank into her chair, eyes darting around like a trapped bird. She knew the fallout would touch her too, because she had laughed when my daughter cried. That night my mother-in-law's empire crumbled. Calls came from relatives, from community elders, from neighbors who had already seen the forwarded documents. She tried to scream at me, to claw back the control she thought was hers, but her voice cracked, and for the first time she sounded small. I didn't shout back. I didn't need to. My silence was louder than her rage. Days turned into weeks, and the house transformed. She avoided gatherings. My sister stopped visiting, too ashamed to face the whispers. My husband, broken by the truth, tried to rebuild the trust he had let rot. I didn't forgive him, not yet, but I let him sit in his guilt. That was punishment enough, and my daughter, her hair grew back, soft and defiant. Each strand was a reminder that we had survived, that we were no longer victims in this house, but witnesses to its collapse. Sometimes I still hear echoes of their laughter in my head, that cruel night when they shaved away her innocence. But I also remember the look in their eyes when the truth came out. That is the image I hold close. That is my justice, because revenge isn't fire. It isn't an explosion. It is ice, slow, merciless, and unforgettable. And even now, when I pass by my mother-in-law's closed door, when I hear her muffled sobs, I know one thing with certainty. She will never laugh at me or my child again. And that was my story. A story of silence, betrayal, humiliation, and finally justice. But tell me, if it had been you, what would you have done? Would you have stayed quiet, or would you have fought back the way I did? I want to hear your thoughts. Share them with me in the comments below. Because every family hides secrets, and every silence has a breaking point. If this story touched you, don't forget to like the video. It tells me you want more stories like this. And if you haven't already, subscribe, because the next story might be even darker, even closer to your own life than you realize. Until then, remember, cruelty always leaves a shadow, and sometimes that shadow learns to fight back.